people who are voting for him because they think America is in crisis. They think that especially the leftward skew of a lot of institutions that are supposed to monitor or inform our government or implement government policy, from the civil service to journalism, media, academia, that the fact that these institutions have left-wing people implementing the rules means that in some ways it doesn't matter who gets elected to make the rules. And so what they wanted was a bull in a china shop, someone who is going to come and cut through all of that, who's going to break the power of what election forecaster Nate Silver calls the indigo blob, which is people who are kind of somewhere between progressive and center right, and was going to make it so that they could no longer use that power that they have to decide what the rules mean and to call all of the close calls for the home team. And I am somewhat sympathetic to that. Look, I am a conservative. I'm a right-leaning columnist. I think maybe conservatives would object to me calling myself on their number, but I'm certainly, I think of myself as someone on the right. I have spent my entire career working in mainstream media. I can indeed verify that most journalists are Democrats, which you already knew. And I am sympathetic to the fact that this does influence, it inevitably influences what questions people think are important, what questions, what context they add, whether they, how much scrutiny they apply to various claims. And I think, when I think about people on the left complaining about Fox News, what they're really complaining about is the same thing. Fox News does not make stuff up. Fox News tells different stories from the mainstream media, provides different context, provides different emphasis and interpretation, and the left doesn't like it. Well, the right doesn't like it when the left doesn't either. The problem, as I said, is that Trump is not really a good candidate to fix those issues.
And so let's unpack that a little bit because we do talk about the fact that some of these critical institutions are either become so just mired in the muck of it all, or are so bureaucratic, or are so disconnected from any kind of accountability that they're just broken. So what is it that we should be looking for in there, and why is it that the former president may not be able to actually change anything in his version of what Drain the Swamp is supposed to look like?
So look, I think actually, we're mostly hearing about this with trans issues, where there's a lot of sort of contest over how the bureaucracy is making decisions, how schools are making decisions about curriculum, and about, say, allowing kids to socially transition without telling their parents. But I actually think the most egregious example of this was during the pandemic, when the CDC Vaccine Advisory Committee met, and they were supposed to advise the CDC who should get the vaccines first. And they were given data showing what the outcome of various plans. Well, they had one plan that was to give it after everyone agreed medical workers should get the vaccines first. But after that, there was one plan that was we could vaccinate essential workers next, people who like grocery store clerks and mailmen and firemen, all of those jobs. And then another plan was that we would vaccinate seniors first. And their own data, the data that they were given, showed that vaccinating seniors first was projected to save the most lives. And they chose the plan to vaccinate essential workers on the grounds that more essential workers were Black and brown, and racial equity. There were other things going on there. There was also economic equity. There were a bunch of things. What's really startling is if you go back and look at the video of this conversation, that no one even suggests, what if we did the one that saves the most lives instead of the one that, sort of pursues a more aggressive social justice agenda. And they eventually rolled this back as soon as this became public. There was a public outcry. Even my very liberal mother was outraged. And so they actually did, as people may recall, end up vaccinating senior citizens first. But the way that decision was made, the worry, of course, is what other decisions are they making that we don't know about in the same way? Right. And how is that influencing our lives? And that is a real valid question that conservatives are asking. The question is Trump positioned to fix this? So number one, let's point out this happened during the Trump administration.
Right.
So he had not dismantled all of these apparati. I don't think that's probably, I don't speak Latin. So
it's late in the day. You're good.
Right? Yeah, I'm on the editorial board of the Post, and I am writing columns. And as you can imagine, this is basically nonstop right now. So if I start muttering incoherently, I apologize. But so it was, I think that those questions were real. The problem is that Donald Trump is to actually dismantle this. Need to know how the system works. Any readers who are religious may be familiar with a great aphorism by G.K. Chesterton, who talks about what he calls Chesterton's fence. Is if you've got this fence there and you say, like, let's tear it, and it's in the middle of the road, and you say, this is useless, let's tear it down. He says, wait a minute, I have no idea what this is doing here. And he says, wait a minute, I don't want you to tear down the fence if you don't know what it's doing there. If you know what it's doing there and you can tell me that it's no longer needed or that purpose was bad, then we can tear the fence down, but don't just start hacking at it on the assumption that your ancestors were stupid. And I think social conservatives love this argument because it is an argument for, okay, well, we don't necessarily know what that cultural rule is doing, but it might be load-bearing. Don't just, grab your sledgehammer and start knocking at it. And I think that that's also true with government, is that to actually change and counter the leftward drift of bureaucratic rulemaking, you need someone who understands how the system works.
Right.
And so what you saw in the Trump administration was that, oddly, the areas where they made the most progress were the areas he didn't care about. So the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, or the FCC, these were not big priorities for Trump. And so he appointed old bureaucratic establishment hands, and they were quite effective because they knew where the bodies were buried.
Yeah.
On the other hand, in the areas that he did care about, like the EPA or commerce, he tended to appoint people who were kind of cronies, who were political actors, and who were not experienced with the bureaucracy, and they got nothing done.
Yeah.
And so you actually do need that level of experience. You also need like a lot of focus. It takes a long time, and I will give you an example of, I think, a huge mistake that the Trump administration made with something called Schedule F. This was a plan basically to make it easier to fire senior level civil servants. And the reason they wanted to do that was, again, to be able to exert more control over the bureaucracy and not let a left-leaning bureaucracy stymie everything Republicans wanted to do. I actually think there's a good argument for this.
Yeah.
I think because, civil servants should be accountable to the people who are elected. However, the way the Trump administration did this was that they, on the way out the door after they'd already lost the election, they threw out this Schedule F and said, we're changing the rules. And then he lost and he left. Well, that gave the bureaucracy notice of what he was planning to do. And so the Office of Personnel Management went through a lengthy 2.5-year rulemaking process, which is how this stuff is supposed to work. And they put a rule in place that will now make it very difficult for Trump to come in and do this. If he wants to do this now, he's going to have to go through the same lengthy multiple-year rulemaking process to get this initiative in place. And that kind of lack of attention to detail, of not really kind of planning strategically, checking off the stuff one by one, of getting kind of whipped around by what has caught the president's attention right now, is really inimical to the kind of change that conservatives want to make, and that I think in many cases they're justified in wanting to make.
Yeah. Fantastic perspective as always. Megan McArdle, of course, Washington Post columnist, has been busy between editorial and writing, and whether you're grabbing your battle axe or your pen or your keyboard, we'll follow you into battle anytime, Megan, and fantastic perspective as always. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That's the best of the best right there, Megan McArdle. When we come back, we're going to flip the script and we're going to look at a potential Harris administration. What are some of the worries? What are some of the weaknesses that might prevent her from having success in the Oval Office? We'll take a look at that coming up next. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's 1:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bonas. KSL's top local story this hour. University of Utah police looking for an armed man who fired shots into the air near the campus this morning. No one was hurt. They say the man drove away from the scene in a white Nissan Altima. Wildlife officials say we're going to see an increase in animal crashes this month. The Utah Wildlife Migration Initiative Coordinator, Makeda Hansen, says you'll see more deer because they migrate to warmer areas and because it's mating season.
Animals are really moving, especially this time of year in November, and they're moving during those early morning and afternoon hours. So just for people to exercise extra caution this time of year because animals are going to be on the roadway.
The Division of Wildlife Resources says if you see an animal on or near the road, stay in your lane, slow down, honk your horn and flash your lights, and continue driving slowly through the area as animals often travel in groups. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. The death toll from flash flooding in Spain is up over 200 now. This is the deadliest natural disaster in Spain's modern history. ABC reporting some towns are still waiting for emergency help to reach them, and more rain said to be on the way. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up on the day now, 301 points. The NASDAQ is up 146. Our KSL weather. The sunshine we're seeing now will give way to clouds over the weekend. That's next. KSL News Time, 1:32.
Here's a way to get breaking news updates anywhere you go.
At the store or in a work meeting, you can get breaking news on your phone.
You can quickly read it, swipe, or click for more. It's super discreet, super fast.
That's the app for KSL News Radio.
The Advanced Window Products end-of-season sale is happening now. Your chance to get beautiful new state-of-the-art windows and save a bundle on your energy bill. Call Advanced Window Products now, and they'll give you $2,500 off on 10 windows or more. We're talking about custom frames and sealed double-pane glass, any style, any color, and they're created just for you right here in Utah. You need a doggy door inlaid into the glass? They do it all the time. In fact, Advanced Window Products has been building the highest quality windows here in Salt Lake City for 38 years. So there's no middleman and you save money. They build the windows, they install the windows, and they guarantee them for life. So keep the heat inside with new windows. The energy companies will even give you a rebate. Advanced Window Products offers 0% financing, affordable monthly payments, and now $2,500 off on 10 windows or more. Call them right now, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100, or go to advancedwindows.com.
At Fisher Investments, we may seem like other money managers, but we're different.
What makes you so different than the rest of us?
We ensure clients receive unparalleled service at every step of the relationship.
Tell me more.
Our investment counselors focus on service over sales, prioritizing clients' needs.
How do you make money?
We don't sell any commission-based products. We have a simple management fee based on the value of our client's portfolio. So we do better when our clients do better.
What about client portfolios?
We get to know each client, their finances, family, health, lifestyle, and more, and then we tailor a portfolio based on their specific goals and needs.
Your clients really come first then, huh?
Yes, we make them a top priority. Our goal is helping them achieve a comfortable retirement.
Wow, maybe we are different.
At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com.
Investing in securities involves the risk of loss.
We have 5 kids, 2 dogs, and we've bought 4 houses in the last 12 years. So our realtors helped us through the complexities of buying a house, the legalities of different property rights, right-of-ways, building concerns, or even ordinances, right?
If we were to try to do this on our own, we would have made a lot of financial mistakes. The realtor is now part of our family. She's who helps our family get to wherever our next chapter is.
Discover how a realtor can make a real difference at myrealtorstory.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Sinclair's DinoPay app. Save up to 20 cents per gallon. And here's Ricky Meese.
No accidents reported on your Valley freeways, but we do have some slowdowns southbound on I-15 in Weber County going from Roy at 5600 South to Sunset. It doesn't last very long, but it's really a drag in that spot. And then we have fire crews working a fire, so drivers, you may want to avoid the area 5th South between 2200 and 2300 East. Enjoy ice skating with your friends and family on the fastest ice on Earth this holiday season. Head to the Utah Olympic Oval to skate on the 400-meter ice. More information at UtahOlympicLegacy.org. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Partly cloudy today with a high of 57, then cloudy tomorrow with a chance of rain. Rain and high elevation snow are likely on Sunday. 52 degrees, partly cloudy right now. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Well, we're continuing our full hour of focus on the presidential race as we are to this final Friday before the first Tuesday of November and the big election coming up. And as we've looked at the candidates, we've been looking at the closing arguments. And as you all know, we're always equal opportunity offenders on this show. And so we're willing to criticize, and we're also equal opportunity commenders on this show when candidates do the right thing and do things well, whether you agree with it politically or not. If they execute it from a strategy or a communication standpoint, we love that. We like to reward good behavior on this show, not bad behavior. One of the things that we've talked about is the fact that most people fail, not because they don't have the right strengths, but because often their weaknesses become the dominant force in their behavior. In our last segment, of course, we had Megan McArdle on the line with us from the Washington Post, talking about the weaknesses in a potential Trump 2.0 administration and what might prevent them from accomplishing some of the things that they are claiming they are going to do. Now we're going to flip the script and we're going to look at Vice President Kamala Harris. Of course, she's negotiating, working through this process in a very truncated election for her. And then, of course, you have things like transition and personnel. And that is an area where the vice president has struggled within the vice president's office and when she was in the Senate. And so we want to get underneath the hood of that as an interesting thing to look at, moving, again, towards a potential Harris administration. Jasper Goodman's a reporter at Politico, covers economic policy in Congress. And he and our friend Adam Cancron had a great piece in Politico talking about these personnel battles and what happens if Vice President Harris becomes President Harris. And Jasper, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
All right, so break this down. Obviously, both sides, this happens every election. They have these they try to keep them quiet in terms of potential transition teams and what that personnel might look like. How are things stacking up? This has been an area that the vice president has struggled with, the personnel side of things, in various roles. What have you made of it? What are you hearing?
Well, the first thing to understand about Kamala Harris's transition is the extremely truncated period of time in which she's trying to put this operation together. Let's just think about this for a minute. In 2020, President Joe Biden's transition operation was well underway in a period of time that was before Kamala Harris even became a candidate in this race. So she has, over the last couple of months, Boy, it feels like a long time that the race has been Trump v. Harris. But in terms of preparing for what the next administration might look like, it's really left a lot of people in scramble mode.
For sure.
And so what we see now is that the Kamala Harris transition, which I've been covering alongside some of my colleagues at Politico, is starting out as a smaller than normal or a smaller than last time operation, focused at this point on a group of aides who have worked with the vice president or worked in the Biden administration before, starting to chart the course and starting to prepare for what a Harris administration would look like. And I think, the thrust of our piece is looking at how this is a smaller operation than we've seen in the past. It is a more private and secret operation than we've seen in the past. And that's led to some anxieties among Democrats who want to know more about sort of what the personnel side of a Harris administration would look like. And so all of this is set to come to a head over the next couple of weeks, depending on what happens, of course, next Tuesday. And, I think I've been listening through some of the afternoon, and as you've been focused on, it's hard to think beyond next Tuesday at this point. There's just so many clouds of uncertainty surrounding what's going to happen that most people can't even get their minds to even think about what a transition team should be doing. But I think what you're going to see is, the moment that the race is called, all the focus is going to turn to the transition and the who and the what. Who's going to take what roles and the jockeying around that. So I think what our story is and what we're beginning to see with the Harris transition is them starting to chart the course for what the Harris administration would look like. And some early anxieties about who might get what nods in said administration.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. You start seeing some of the who, and that will tell you a whole lot about what the priorities are. As you see people say, okay, there's clearly someone who's got expertise in this space that might lead to this policy, and those who like to watch the tea leaves or kind of do the trajectory out there, that gets really interesting really fast. And as you said, this is so truncated. Like it's a truncated truncation, I think, is the only way to describe it. It is so short to put together a transition team, and so that is no small task and an unenviable one, but one that is going to be so important because that transition matters, not just here at home, but that matters internationally as well. Our foreign affairs depend on some of those key things, and having some certainty or at least some confidence in direction. So as you kind of look under the hood in terms of some of that jockeying that is going on, anything that you're seeing or any hints you're getting in terms of maybe one or two of those key roles or some of the priorities that they might have to fill with some who's, some what's, and some whys after Tuesday?
Yeah, so I think we can throw around various names who are being thought of for potential jobs in administration. The truth is, no one's been committed to anything, no jobs have been offered. But I think when you look at the question of personnel and who's going to go where, the most interesting dynamic around this is actually has little to do with the presidential race and actually has more to do with what's going to happen in the Senate this year. So I want to think about a scenario that a lot of people see in Washington right now as likely, which is that Harris could win and she could, for the first time in a long time, a new administration come in and have the opposite party in control of the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
So that would mean Republicans are in power in the Senate and would have the ability to block Harris from advancing nominees to fill key roles. And the reason that that's so key in this case is because if Harris wins, it'll be a friendly handoff from the president's team to his vice president's team. And you will have cabinet secretaries in place from the Biden administration, confirmed by the Senate, who could just stay on. And it'll be important in the early days of the Harris administration for them to start to carve out more about who Kamala Harris is, the ways in which her administration might differ from the last 4 years of the Biden administration. But one dynamic to be aware of is that if they feel that their nominees for key position, like Treasury Secretary, post at the UN, Attorney General, couldn't get through the Senate, they may be forced to stick with the people currently in their role.
Oh,
and in that case, I think you're going to see them work to try and be creative. Think about other ways in which they can start to differentiate themselves on the policy side. It may be in press announcements and these sorts of things. But as we think about the transition and who's going to move into these roles, just bear in mind that so much of it actually hinges on what happens in the Senate. I know you have a Senate race in your state this year, not one of the most closely watched ones, but a race nonetheless. And it's those Senate contests in places like Ohio, Montana, Michigan, Arizona, and to a lesser extent Texas and Florida that are really going to determine the ways in which she's going to be able to overhaul personnel if she wins.
Oh, that is fabulous. Nobody's talking about that today. That's why we do this, folks. Jasper Goodman, reporter at Politico, a great piece. And thinking of divided government and a new administration, you have to get those nominees through the Senate. They have the ability to block a lot of those senior positions and even a few levels down from there. And that can really change the dynamic. So do you stay with some of the Biden administration folks in those, since you wouldn't have to have them reconfirmed in that space? That is great thinking, great writing. Jasper Goodman, thanks so much for joining us today. Great stuff.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right. Interesting what can slow you down in an administration. And if it's divided government, if Vice President Harris becomes the president, but the Republicans take control of the Senate, that changes the dynamic in terms of who you can nominate to what position that has to be confirmed by the United States Senate. Same thing could be true with a second round of a Trump administration were he to pick up the victory, but Democrats control the Senate. He'd have a very similar problem. So interesting things beyond just what happens on Tuesday. Remember, it's what marches forward that actually matters. We'll step aside for a quick break. More Inside Sources coming up next.
You do countless things without a second thought to protect your family and home. Every time you're in the car, you buckle your seatbelt. Before the next load of laundry, you remove the dryer lint. When you head out, you always lock your doors. And one simple task, done far less often, can protect your family and home this winter. Schedule a furnace inspection by a certified heating contractor to check for safety and efficiency. A friendly reminder from Enbridge Gas.
My name is Brian King, and I'm running to be your governor because Utah is headed in the wrong direction, and we can do so much better. If you're frustrated by politics today, if you feel like politicians aren't listening to you, if you're looking for something different, for a leader who prioritizes common sense and bipartisanship, you have a place with us in this campaign. Join us and vote for Brian King for governor by November 5th. For the better.
Paid for by Brian for Utah.
KSL Broadcast Group contests are open to participants 13 years of age and older that are residents of Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and Nevada, unless otherwise specified. Employees or agents of the station, Bonneville International Corporation, or other area radio stations, or any entity associated with the contest may not enter. Persons who have won in the last 90 days from a station contest or event are not eligible. Full general contest rules are available at kslnewsradio.com.
Hi, this is Doug Wright. Over the years, I've talked a lot about hard water. It takes years off the life of water heaters and other appliances in your home. Leaves scum on the shower walls, and you almost need a jackhammer to remove that. I've talked about how Connecticut of Utah, an authorized Connecticut dealer, their water softeners are maintenance-free. You just don't need adjustment, and they do the job with 2/3 less salt than other softeners. But today, I want to talk about the exhilarating feeling of stepping into a hot bath or shower and feeling that pure, soft water cascade over your skin. It feels like every pore in your body wants to stand up and start singing. And afterward, there are no itchy hard water deposits sticking all over you. You really should look into a soft water system from Connecticut of Utah, an authorized Connecticut dealer. You can learn more about Connecticut by giving them a call at 801-576-8600 or log on to Softwater Utah. Connecticut of Utah, an authorized Connecticut dealer. Then sit back and enjoy your shower even more.
An airliner takes off from the Pacific Northwest, carrying 101 passengers and crew. Most aboard Flight 293 are active-duty military and their families, headed to Cold War assignments in Alaska.
Surveillance of the Soviet military buildup.
But somewhere over the ocean, with no distress call, the airliner plunges into the icy water below.
Even if all 4 engines quit, that aircraft would fly.
There were no survivors and no bodies were ever recovered. For decades, loved ones were left to wonder
what happened to Flight 293 and why hasn't there been any follow-up?
The government turned its back. Passengers and crew of Flight 293 were forgotten by everyone, except their families.
Unless we pursue it, we will never be issued a true explanation.
Unsolved Histories: What Happened to Flight 293 is available now. Follow us at unsolvedhistoriespod.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, flash flooding in Spain, said to be that country's worst natural disaster in its modern history. More than 200 people have died. Second, police are looking for a man who fired shots into the air near the U of U campus early this morning. No one was hurt. Third, those Great Salt Lake license plates we've been promised are now available. 52 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Get deeper insights on the news from Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today, as always. I am Boyd Matheson. As we close out this hour of focus on what's going to take place next week on the first Tuesday of November, We've looked at what the candidates are doing. We've looked at closing arguments. And now we want to focus on what's really going on with voters. What are they talking about around the kitchen table? What are they talking about in their community? And as always, it is a good day here on Inside Sources when Lois Collins joins us, of course, Special Projects and Family Issues reporter, the Deseret News, one of our favorites. And Lois, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks, Boyd.
Great piece, as always, at Deseret.com, talking about the American Family Survey. Of course, over the last 10 years, that has been a crucial place to look at a lot of what is happening inside of families. And in this particular piece at Deseret.com, you talk about the economics and the money issues of it all. What did you learn?
Right. And this, by the way, is a sneak preview. The full survey comes out in December. But we asked adults, 3,000 of them, nationally representative sample, what worried them the most economically, and hands down, it's inflation. It's way ahead of everything else.
And so as you look at those numbers, kind of give us a little bit of a breakdown there in terms of what it is that they're sensing, what it is that they're most worried about.
So 55% of them are very worried about inflation, which, by the way, is kind of interesting because in September, inflation hit its 3-year low. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but that's that's people trying to put food on the table, trying to pay for all the things that you have to pay mortgage or rent, and Americans are feeling a pinch. So 43% of them were very worried about rising tax bills, 35% were very worried about interest rates, 33% national debt, 25% each for unemployment and lack of government supports. But if you add in the number of people who were somewhat worried with the people who were very worried, it was almost 90% for inflation, which is, as one of the researchers said from BYU who did the analysis, he said that's like everybody in survey talk. 90% is definitely high.
Yeah, you can't get 90% of the people to agree that the sky is blue or water is wet.
No.
And I think that shows what an important issue this is. It's going to be fascinating to see what message voters express by their votes on Tuesday when it comes to this, because I think both campaigns have kind of gone down to the populist lowest common denominator in terms of what they're going to do or trying to tout things that they have done. And I think it's one of those where there's just a disconnect. That are there good things in the economy? Yes. Are things getting better as you described it? Yes. And people are sitting around the kitchen table and they're either somewhat worried or very worried. 90%, that's just about everybody.
That is a really high number. And it's interesting because there was a breakdown by partisanship. Republicans are more worried, or more Republicans are worried than Democrats. There's also a breakdown in terms of income. Obviously, people that were low income and middle income were more concerned than people were high income, which we counted as over 100,000 household income. But bottom line is people really want to feel like they can afford their lives, and they're not sure they can. And so I don't know if that will translate to votes. It's really hard to say what people vote on when you get in the booth. I don't know about you, but I usually have one or two issues that are top of mind, and I sort of consider those especially hard. But this indicates that the economy will very much be on people's minds and has been on their minds as they did their early voting.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting that you cited in your piece, talking about Pope and Karpowitz from BYU, talking about the results, that this really is there's a bipartisan component to this as well in terms of not just Republicans being extra worried about it or more likely to talk about it, but there were also Democrats, too, believe inflation is amongst those very top.
Yeah, both parties said it was their top concern. The numbers, the percentages were a little bit different, and it leaned a little bit more concern on the Republican side. But both parties, if you listed the concerns in order, it was definitely that. The second concern was rising taxes, which is also interesting because both candidates have kind of addressed that and said, at least for people up to like 400,000, they have no immediate plans to raise taxes. But people really care about their pocketbooks right now.
Yeah, no question about it. Anything else pop out? I know the full report will come out in December. Anything else that you can share with us in terms of what you learned, what you gleaned from this survey, which I think is one that is still one of the great unknowns and most valuable resources out there when it comes to the American Family Survey. What else did you glean? What else can you share with us today?
So the thing that's interesting about the survey is that this is our 10th year. So we have 10 years of data on some topics. We talk about attitudes, we talk about what worries families, and we talk about how families live. And we break it down in a lot of ways. We break it down by income, by partisanship, by age, by whether they have kids, they don't have kids. So it's a really good nationally representative look at the American family and how they live their lives. But it also says a lot about what they worry about and what they hope for. And so I'm always excited when it comes out. It'll come out in early December. And this is the year that we do have a decade of trend data on some of the questions. And then we also talk in the survey every year about other things besides just the trend data. So we look at what's happening in the news and look at that. So we had, for a couple of years, we really took a deep dive into how people were feeling and were affected by COVID, for instance. So it's always got fresh components and trend data, and it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, great stuff. As always, Lois Collins, Special Projects and Family Issues reporter at the Deseret News. You can check out her piece, Voters Outline Their Worry in America Family Survey, and you can find that at Deseret.com. Lois, as always, thanks so much for joining us. Great stuff.
My pleasure. Thanks, Boyd. See ya.
All right. Always good to have Lois Collins on the show with us. And that data is so interesting to me because we've been talking throughout this first hour of the show as we've looked at what are the closing arguments for both campaigns. And neither of them are really going at this in a direct way. It seems like a very obvious component for former President Trump that he would be really hammering the whole idea of inflation, what it's costing American families. But it's kind of a sub topic in his big public events. You don't hear a lot of it around the campaign trail. And so really interesting. Again, what you choose to focus on down the stretch makes a difference because it also signals what your priorities are and what you're most likely to do. The Harris campaign has not had to respond to a lot of things about inflation because her opponent isn't talking about it all that much amongst all the other things that the former president is talking about. And as we've said many times, and as we round out this first hour, looking at the pros and cons, the things they're doing well and the places where they're missing, just remember, elections are usually lost, not won. And you usually lose, not because you don't have the right strengths, but because your weaknesses become the dominant force in your behavior. For the former president, it's about focus and what he chooses to talk about, the restraint that he often doesn't show. For the vice president, we talked about her ability to staff and to keep good staff, and she's going to have some very interesting challenges if she is to win and then to begin to govern. What does that look like, especially if we end up with this thing Americans seem to like a lot, divided government? We'll talk about that a little more as we get into next week on our march towards the first Tuesday and, more importantly, the first Wednesday of November. That wraps it up for hour number one. We'll step aside for some top-of-the-hour news, but don't go anywhere. We got a big hour number two coming up, and we're going to start off with my conversation with Phelim Kind about something I'm sure you haven't been hearing about. That's what we're doing with China. Stick around. We'll be right back.
KSL FM Midvale.
KSL Salt Lake City.
From the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios, this is KSL News Radio.
Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
It's 2 o'clock at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomis. KSL's top story this hour, Salt Lake City firefighters had to go back to the scene of an apartment fire early this morning. The crews were first called to Chateau Normandy on the corner of 1st South and 4th East yesterday afternoon because of reports of smoke coming from the windows. Fire Captain Chris Burke says they were called back just after midnight. The building has been mostly unoccupied. The state now has enough applications to move forward with putting out a new Great Salt Lake commemorative license plate. Jason Gardner with the Utah State Tax Commission says the Design Review Board is gearing up to approve a final design and get it distributed.
This Great Salt Lake plate is going to be the first of its kind and probably going to have a really snazzy design because of the fact that it's getting the extra treatment that other special group plates haven't had.
Proceeds for the plates go directly toward preserving and protecting the Great Salt Lake. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. Just days before Election Day, a top federal official says foreign governments are spreading phony stories on social media. Jen Easterly with the Department of Homeland Security tells ABC News that China, Russia, and Iran, among others, are spreading misinformation online about the safety of our elections. And she says all the battleground states this year have paper ballots available as a backup in case they need to certify their election results. Your money at this moment, the Dow Jones average up on the day now 270 points, while the NASDAQ is up 138. And our KSL weather. What sunshine we have today will be gone by the weekend. That's next. KSL News Time 201.
News doesn't just mean information or dates.
It's the story of our local history being told in real time.
Be a part of the story. This is Tim Hughes and Amanda Dixon.
We hope to be a part of your story. We have you covered on KSL News Radio.
Get up to a 30% upfront bonus to use for your retirement income, or up to 12% per year to help grow your retirement income. Whether you're in retirement or will be retiring within 10 years, Trajan Wealth can offer some of the highest guarantees in the business. I'm Jeff Jr. with Trajan Wealth, and I know no one wants to work forever. We all need to retire someday, and I know you've worked hard for your money. So now is the time to guarantee it. Take advantage of up to a 30% upfront bonus for your retirement income, or up to 12% per year for retirement income. Don't woulda, shoulda, coulda. Get up to a 30% bonus just for opening an account, or up to 12% per year for retirement income. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Retire the right way, the Trajan way, with Trajan Wealth. Call Trajan today at 801-899-7600. That's 801-899-7600.
Annuity guarantees are based on the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. DBA in most states says Trajan Wealth Insurance Solutions.
How serious is youth vaping? Irreversible lung damage serious. 1 in 10 kids vape serious, which warrants a serious conversation from a serious parental figure like yourself. Not the seriously know-it-all sports dad or the seriously smart podcaster. It requires a serious conversation that is best had by you. No, seriously, the best person to talk to your child about vaping is you. To start the conversation, visit talkaboutvaping.org. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and the Ad Council.
Be advised, this is your opportunity to save up to 40 to 80% on a hot tub or swim spa. This weekend only, today through Sunday. Utah State Fair Park. Be advised, this is your opportunity to save up to 40 to 80% on a hot tub or swim spa. This weekend only, today through Sunday. Utah State Fair Park. 18-month interest-free financing. Our factories have demanded we sell 1,000 hot tubs and swim spas this weekend. Utah State Fair Park. Huge factory incentives, factory rebates, this weekend only. Utah State Fair Park. We can remove your old hot tub. Free delivery of your new hot tub. Hot tub starting at $2,999. Utah State Fair Park. Free delivery of your new hot tub. Just relax and enjoy. Utah State Fair Park. Today, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Saturday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Free admission, free parking, free delivery. Utah State Fair Park. Call 833-SPA-SALE or visit hottubandSwimSpaSale.com.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Sinclair's DinoPay app. Save up to 20 cents per gallon. Here's Ricky Meese.
Pretty quiet out on the roadways. No accidents, no delays on the freeways, but we have had some slower traffic northbound Mountain View approaching 3500 South, as well as Pioneer Crossing and Crossroads Boulevard in Saratoga Springs, where we do have road work restricting lanes of travel. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
Partly cloudy today with a high of 57, and tomorrow cloudy with a chance of rain. And rain and high elevation snow are likely on Sunday. 54 degrees, partly cloudy right now. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
The headlines, of course, continue to be centered in the final days of the 2024 election cycle. But underneath those headlines, there is actually this thing that they're all running to do. It's called governing. And it usually happens under the headlines and far away from the spotlight. The Biden administration has been working on some interesting under the headline diplomacy, and that's where we begin.
Think you know the news of the day? Think again with Boyd Matheson on KSL News Radio.
Well, the campaign chatter and clamor, of course, is taking all the oxygen out of most rooms, but there are rooms where things actually are happening that you may not be aware of, that we might want to think again about what we think we know. As I mentioned, the Biden administration has been working underneath the headlines on some diplomacy, foreign policy. It's been a priority for the Biden administration, and they have released over 70 American citizens from foreign nations. And most recently, some very interesting things happening as it relates to the U.S. and China. Always a good day when we get to be joined by Phelim Kind, journalist, human rights researcher, and advocate, educator, and editor with 2+ decades of China and Asia-focused reporting experience. A great piece in Politico. And Phelim, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Brilliant piece, and one that had skipped most of our attention, and that is a rarity. I can't even think of the last time we could even, I don't know if we could ever say this, in terms of a Chinese-U.S. swap of people being detained. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't think that it's definitely in recent memory or recent history, there is no sign of U.S. and Chinese authorities being able to come to an agreement to swap prisoners of interest. But that's exactly what happened last month when the Chinese agreed to release a Californian man by the name of David Lin, who had been arbitrarily and wrongfully detained by the Chinese since 2006. He came home on September 15th, and we at Politico broke the story in the last 24 hours that came about as a result of a prisoner swap. A as yet unknown Chinese citizen who was behind bars here in the U.S. got swapped for David Lin to come home, and that really is unprecedented.
Yeah, and he was detained since 2006. I don't know how many of us can wrap our heads around that, having someone wrongfully detained for that period of time. Tell us what you have found out in your reporting in terms of how this all came about, and more importantly, what comes next? What does this send a trend for?
Well, the State Department has there is what's called the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, which has been tasked to free U.S. citizens who are decreed by the State Department to be, quote unquote, wrongfully detained. So this means these are people that the State Department considers to have not committed any crime and instead are victims of unaccountable and corrupt judicial systems overseas. So it's a fairly small list. They're working on this all the time, and there have been 3 Americans on that list since 2006, and so what we've had is a breakthrough in bringing this guy home last month. And I think what's going to happen now is, I think the speculation is, and we're going to be reporting on this if we can, is was the release of David Lin last month a model for how the Biden administration in its dying weeks is going to try to bring home these other 2 men behind bars, wrongfully detained, unjustly jailed. Their names are Mark Sweden and Kai Lee. And so the chances are that there are negotiations ongoing to try to replicate that success. But as you know, boy, this is a very fraught time in U.S.-China relations, and it's really easy for delicate negotiations to be derailed by any number of factors.
Yeah, and it is a delicate dance indeed, and the fact that the Biden administration clearly has been focused on this, I think, especially in these waning days, as they try to really bolt in some things that have been important to them throughout the administration. And one of the things that you pointed out in your piece that I thought was just so spot on is this kind of exchange is just not in China's DNA. Like, it's just not a natural thing. And what are you sensing, or what are you seeing from your unique perch there, Phelim, in terms of any shift or any directional signal we can get out of this?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that and this is something that the U.S. diplomats, including U.S. Ambassador to China Nicholas Burns, never fails to bring up with his Chinese counterparts is if you want to take some of the rancor out of the U.S.-China relationship, release these Americans. It's a constant point of friction on Capitol Hill. It's something that really bothers people because it's such an easy one. Like, you let these guys go. You can call it whatever you want. Medical release, compassionate grounds, humanitarian grounds. And so only now is that apparently happening. And, China stands to benefit from this in two ways. They can get home people who they consider to be valuable for whatever reason, and we can only speculate. And also, it sort of defangs one of the main sort of toxic touch points in the U.S.-China relationship by China saying we're letting these people home. And it can be interpreted by, China doing a good thing and finally recognizing these men were behind bars, because they're all men, behind bars unjustly.
Yeah. And then finally, let's get to some of that delicate dance in terms of things that could get this a little more sideways. Obviously, we have this little thing called the election next Tuesday. Does that create any pressure one way or the other? If it's a Harris-to-be regime in waiting, or whether it's a Trump 2.0 regime in waiting, does that impact the dynamics or what China might be most interested in doing on the way of the Biden administration's exit?
Yeah, I think that so there are two points to that. And I think the first one, Boyd, is that for President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, this is a legacy lap. If they can bring these guys home on their watch, it's a really significant achievement in terms of their time in office. And so the clock is ticking. They have until January 20th to pull this off. And for the Chinese, for Beijing, by releasing these men, they could, set themselves up to whatever the next administration would be as looking more cooperative, more engaging, and less hostile at a time when all of those qualities are really in short supply and are much needed, given this is like the most important relationship the United States has with another country.
Yeah, no question about it. Anything else you're keeping your eye on just kind of underneath the headlines as you watch all of this play out?
Generally about the election or this issue in particular?
Actually, but give us both. Give us both today. I'm going to take all of you that I can today, Phelim.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, we're coming down to the stakes of who wins next week, and I'm watching very closely to what the policies are for both of these candidates. I mean, for the Trump policy, for the Trump campaign, all we know is it's about tariffs.
Yeah.
And the Harris team really hasn't articulated a very detailed China policy. And, if they win the election, they need to put that together really quickly. So there are all kinds of people within this space that I occupy as well, in terms of U.S.-China relationship watching to figure out, what's going on with that. And the other angle is, the big question, Boyd, is who is China's candidate? Yeah. Do they want Donald Trump because they think that he might be more transactional, more flexible, more willing to bargain? Or do they want the relative predictability of a Harris administration, which is widely predicted to essentially continue in large part the Biden administration China policy, which Beijing has big problems with, but at least it's to a certain extent kind of the devil they know.
Yeah.
So there's just so many unknowns here, Boyd. So buckle up,
That's right. And it is coming. As always, Phelim Kine, best of the best. You can check out his piece at Politico.com. And Phelim, we always appreciate you making time for us. Fantastic perspective.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right. Again, that's Phelim Kine joining us. And he is the best of the best when it comes to China policy and China dynamics. And again, if you missed it, it's been under the headlines. But the U.S., who had been wrongfully detained, and David Lin is free after 16 years in a Chinese prison. 16 years, imagine that, coming home in unprecedented. It's been at least 50 years since this kind of exchange of prisoners has taken place between the United States and China. That's huge. That's significant. We should applaud the Biden administration. That is job well done. and getting someone back on our home territory is always vital. 16 years unlawfully detained is just devastating and tragic. And we hope that David is enjoying some freedom and a chance to vote, which he's not been able to do from a Chinese prison. So many important things there. And, of course, what is China's look and take and desires as when it comes to the election next Tuesday? So a lot to continue to follow, a lot beyond the headlines, as always. We'll be right back.
Think again on Inside Sources with Boyd Matheson. Our Cougars have a week off.
He's going to go! Touchdown!
Prepping for the rivalry game.
Touchdown, BYU!
There's plenty to be excited about, including your calls before BYU Utah on Cougar Nation. Join us 6 to 7 Monday on KSL News Radio at 102.7 FM.
And now a minute of kindness brought to you by One Kind Act a Day. Natural disasters show the power of Mother Nature, but also are a great time for humanity to showcase our strength and our compassion. After the terrible impact of Hurricane Helene, we have seen that the country isn't all that divided, as numerous churches, service organizations, and groups have traveled far distances to help. One North Carolina pastor, Cameron Bryson, got 35 of his parishioners together with a pickup truck full of food and water and gas. On their journey, they were eventually blocked by downed trees, but this didn't stop them. They made the rest of their journey on foot, bringing much-needed aid. All of this came about because of a culture of kindness. You see, we can do big things with just one kind act a day. Find out more about how you can be involved online at thepowerofkind.org. That's thepowerofkind.org.
Did you know your skin is the largest organ of your body? Huh? That's why you should shower with Old Spice Super Hydration Body Wash instead of plain old bar soap. Love your skin by super hydrating it with vitamin B3 and glorious notes of vanilla and shea. Did you know that my super hydrated skin is the second largest organ of my body? The first is my heart. Old Spice. Men have skin too. Old Spice Super Hydration Body Wash. 24/7 renewing moisture. With daily use.
This is the story of a very special woman. Just a few knew about her superpowers. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hello, this is Congresswoman Celeste Malloy. I'm running for re-election to represent you and keep Utah's conservative values in Washington, D.C. Like you, I'm tired of a government that spends too much, listens too little, and makes all of our lives harder. In Washington, I'm pushing back against bad ideas and liberal policies. Let me keep representing you so I can keep fighting for you, because we are just getting started.
I'm Celeste Malloy, and I approve this message.
Paid for by Celeste for Congress.
The Salt Lake Chamber is Utah's voice for business. Okay, that sounds great, but what does it really mean? Well, as Utah's largest and longest-standing business association, they support and champion community prosperity throughout the state. And if you're in business, well, that's a very good thing for you. Be sure to listen to the Chamber's Speaking on Business, weekdays at 7:20, 11:55, and 5:20 p.m. on KSL News Radio.
Any Hour Services can help you make sure your furnace keeps you warm this winter. Whether you need a tune-up or repair or a second opinion about replacing it, call Any Hour Services or visit anyhourservices.com.
911, what's your emergency?
They kidnapped my son.
What would you do if your child disappeared and someone you trusted was responsible?
We thought he cared for McKay, when in fact he didn't care for anyone.
Listen to Ransom now at ransompodcast.com.
Hear elevated conversation on crucial issues. Boyd Matheson on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today. As always, I am Boyd Matheson, and with Americans filling out their ballots this week in preparation for the first Tuesday of election, some polls and surveys have found that voters don't always agree with what their party says and how somebody should vote or not vote. The interesting thing is, historically, of course, the Democrats and the Democratic Party have dominated in early voting. This year, the Republican Party has pushed a few more people to the polls early on than previous elections. We're going to continue to watch that very closely to see if we return to kind of 2016 levels or if we stay very high in terms of the 2020 mail-in and early voting. The Democrats have also pushed away from requiring voter ID, but the surveys show that voters from both parties actually have a little different view on that. J.D. Tuccilli, of course, one of our great friends of the show, is contributing editor at Reason, has a great piece at Reason.com. And J.D., welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Always good to have you in, and give us a sense when it comes to some things that voters actually seem to agree on this election cycle. There's a rarity. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, in an election where Republicans and Democrats can't seem to agree on anything, election procedures have become one of the hot issues. And Democrats have, made it a point to oppose requirements for photo ID to vote and proof of citizenship to vote. And Republicans have been very skeptical about early balloting and, in particular, mail-in votes. Except when it comes down to when you ask the American people what they want, the American people want voting to be easy and secure. That is, they want to be able to vote early and by mail, and they also want people to have to prove their ID in order to be able to cast a ballot. So the voters differ with both the major parties on the two hot-button election procedure issues that the parties have chosen to kind of stake their claim on.
Yeah, and so interesting. One of the other things you pointed out in the piece is there's actually a couple of other levels and layers of election law that Americans seem to agree on, and that's getting to that proof of citizenship when they actually have to register to vote.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, this is really interesting. Gallup polled voters across the board, and they said that, okay, majorities favor early voting. Majorities favor proof of citizenship to register, and majorities favor showing photo ID in order to vote. But what's really interesting when you dig down, it's like, okay, is that like super majorities of each party on one issue or the other? No, it's majorities across the board of Republicans, Democrats, and independents want people to be able to vote early, but also have to prove that they're entitled to vote. I mean, it's 95% of Democrats, 76% of independents, and 57% of Republicans favor early voting. 67% of Democrats, 84% of independents, and 98% of Republicans favor requiring proof of citizenship if you want to register to vote. And 66% of Democrats, 84% of independents, and 96% of Republicans. And I'm sorry, I mixed it up in there a little bit, but favor requiring photo ID. I mixed up photo ID and citizenship. But the point being is that it's majorities across the board want all these things. So when the parties are picking a fight on these issues, they're picking a fight with their own constituents.
Yeah, one of the things you noted as well that I thought was really interesting is that a lot of the Republicans who, again, back in 2020, the top of the ticket and many on down the ballot were really skeptical and leery and even against the early voting, the mail-in voting, and they seem to be shifting as their voters are trending that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether it's because they realize that their base doesn't agree with them, or whether they realize that it doesn't matter when the vote comes in. If it's in your corner, it's a good vote. Either way, most Republicans seem to be shifting away from the idea that early voting is bad. The exception, the one who's kind of mixed message on this, is Donald Trump himself, who, as recently as last week, was making fun of allowing early voting in Michigan. He's been very much against mail-in ballots. But even though someone must have leaned on him, because he said at one point that he was himself going to vote early and then changed his mind. So he's giving a mixed message on this, even as his party is shifting away from the idea that the only one place you can vote is at the voting place on Election Day.
And so as that plays out, and as you watch things kind of trickle in between now and the first Tuesday, what else are you keeping your eye on? What else are you watching for?
Well, what we're watching for is who's going to turn out. And what's interesting is that Republicans are turning out a much greater numbers for early voting. About 35% of early votes so far came in from Republicans, about 39% from Democrats. It's really closing the gap from the last election. So Republicans are definitely taking advantage of early voting opportunities. And what this means is that if you have bad weather someplace in the country on Election Day, it's not going to be so much of a deterrent to voters, because maybe a lot of them have already voted. I mean, that's one of the benefits of having these ballots come in early. So, I mean, in an election that is going to be decided by every number I've seen so far by a whisker, this sort of thing can make a huge difference. I mean, a few thousand votes here and there, and the election goes one way or the other.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I always say it's the worst decision you ever make is when you say, oh, I'll just wait and get gas in the morning and fill up the car. And then the next morning it's snowing and it's sleeting, and then you really don't want to deal with it. And sometimes it happens on voting day. You think, oh, I'm going to vote in the morning. It's like, maybe I'll do it on my way home from work. And then you get stuck at the office, or something happens with family, or you get delayed in traffic. Before you know it, you've kind of missed the window. And so it's clear that some are just saying, hey, I'm going to take that out of the equation. I'm going to get it done early so I can exhale. And I think the other thing that people are saying is if I actually cast my ballot, once I do that, I don't have to keep paying attention to all of these horrific ads that keep coming up on my screen and in my ears.
As someone who voted 2 weeks ago and still gets text messages from all the candidates, I can tell you that the torture never ends. But you just get the task out of the way. Actually, almost 90% of Arizonans vote by mail these days.
Yeah.
The last presidential election was 89%. So this is something that's well established that could be done, and there's a lot of agreement that it should be done.
Yeah, for sure. Give us one look forward past this election cycle. You mentioned in your piece some of the different places. You talked about California, Gavin Newsom signing a law preventing localities from requiring that voter ID before casting the ballot. What do you anticipate, or what are some of those states you're keeping an eye on in terms of how things might shift following the 2024 election cycle?
Given the overwhelming support for all of these things, early voting, mail-in voting, and voter ID, I would think that the parties are going to pay attention to their bases. At some point, they're going to have to shift on this. The Republicans already are. The problem with California or with any one-party state where you don't have a viable opposition is that they almost really don't have to pay attention to their base. And I think that all of us know that there's a certain degree of dysfunction in California politics that maybe exceeds that in a lot of its neighbors that have competitive races. So California probably is not going to change too much very soon, but those parties that are in competitive races in states where you have viable opposing parties, they have to listen to their base if they want themselves to remain competitive.
Great stuff. Great perspective as always, J.D. Tuccille. And you can check out his piece at Reason.com. And J.D., of course, is contributing editor there at Reason. J.D., as always, thanks for making time for us. And good luck as we march our way towards the first Tuesday and what we're going to focus on a little later in our show, the first Wednesday of November. That will actually come, and we're all going to be just fine. J.D., thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Great perspective there from J.D. Tuccille. And it's so interesting that, again, this is a cross-the-board political issue that Democrats, Republicans, and independents are united to say, hey, look, we want voting to be easy or convenient. We want it to be secure. We want to have confidence in the process. And the vast majority, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, say that you should have to show an ID and that you should have to have some proof of citizenship to register to vote. And again, there's no political party assigned to any of that. Everybody agrees that's part of having confidence in the process. And as we've seen here in the state of Utah, there's a lot of reasons to have confidence in the process if you do it right. And the more states that begin to do that and to do the hard work and heavy lifting that we've done here in the state of Utah for many, many years now, I think more and more will get really comfortable. The process will become very clear and very certain. So there's no real paths there in terms of people being able to undermine the credibility or the results. And then we all get to move forward, because the big thing is we all need to do our duty, and we actually need to show up and vote. Whether we do it early, whether we do it in person or through the mail, we can do it, and we can do it with confidence. And there's a process, and there's a set of disciplines that surround that in order to make that a reality. All right, we're going to step aside for some bottom of the hour news. Don't go anywhere. We're going to go back to my conversation with Anne Applebaum from The Atlantic and get some lessons from history and what it might mean towards Europe and Russia and the future of freedom around the world. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's 2:30 at KSL News Radio. I'm Dan Bomis. KSL's top local story this hour. University of Utah police looking for an armed man who fired shots into the air near the campus this morning. Nobody was hurt. They say the man drove away from the scene in a white Nissan Altima. The Davis County Sheriff's Office has doubled the reward for the return of Cash, a police canine trained to sniff out drugs. It's now $2,000. They say a generous citizen put up the additional reward money. Cash is a German short-hair pointer. He disappeared over a week ago. Our top national story this hour from ABC News. A public health department in Idaho has become the first in the country that will not offer the COVID-19 vaccine. Here's ABC's Alex Stone.
In 6 Idaho counties, her health department is no longer allowed to provide the COVID vaccine. The Board of Southwest District Health, which includes some areas around Boise, is believed to be the first in the nation to ban offering the vaccine. Texas doesn't allow health departments to promote it, but they can give it. Other departments have stopped because of low demand or price. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Your money at this moment, at the close of trading now, the Dow Jones average down 288 points. The NASDAQ was down 144. These were positive numbers. The Dow up 288 points on the day. The NASDAQ up 144 points. The S&P 500 was up 23. And our KSL weather looks like skies will get cloudy for the weekend. That's next. KSL News Time 2:31.
You know what's great about KSL's traffic coverage? Trained traffic reporters and real listeners.
Trading information and making the commute safer and faster for everyone.
Every 10 minutes on the 9s, we have you covered on KSL News Radio.
My name is Brian King, and I'm running to be your governor because Utah is headed in the wrong direction, and we can do so much better. If you're frustrated by politics today, if you feel like politicians aren't listening to you, if you're looking for something different, for a leader who prioritizes common sense and bipartisanship, you have a place with us in this campaign. Join us and vote for Brian King for governor by November 5th. For the better.
Paid for by Brian for Utah.
Basketball season is back. With Jazz Plus, you can watch games live from your TV, computer, tablet, or phone. So don't miss any of the action when you're at home or away. Can't get enough of your favorite team? Go behind the scenes and see what the team is up to on and off the court. With flexible plans, you can choose what works for you. From full season to monthly, or just pick a single game you want to watch. Sign up and subscribe today at UtahJazzPlus.com.
Social Security is with you through life's journey from birth to retirement. As your life changes year to year, so do your needs. For over 80 years, Social Security has helped to meet your needs and is committed to improving access to the services that make a difference in your life. Today, you can verify your earnings, estimate your future benefits, apply for retirement, manage your benefits, and even change your address, all from the comfort of your home. Social Security's online services help put you in control with secure access to your information anytime, anywhere, allowing you to spend more time with family, friends, or simply just enjoying the day. Social Security, securing today and tomorrow. See what you can do online at socialsecurity.gov.
Produced at U.S. taxpayer expense.
Traffic and weather together brought to you by Sinclair's Dino Pay app. Save up to 20 cents per gallon. And here's Ricky Meese.
Pretty quiet right now out on all of the Valley freeways. No accidents, no delays. In Utah County, though, we have had some busy and slow traffic going westbound on Pioneer Crossing anywhere between I-15 and Redwood Road. Ricky Meese in the KSL Traffic Center.
We'll have a high of 57 today with partly cloudy skies, and then tomorrow there's a chance of rain, and on Sunday, high elevation snow and rain as well. 55 degrees, partly cloudy right now. I'm Dan Bomas from the KSL Common Spirit Health Studios. Listen online at kslnewsradio.com. We're Utah's news, traffic, and weather station.
Inside Sources. Inside Sources. America's voice of reason. Boyd Matheson on Utah's home for elevated conversation. Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
No matter who wins the election next week, the outside world is going to carry on. We talk about that as the first Wednesday of November issue. Unfortunately, continuing on also includes things like wars abroad in Ukraine and the Middle East that we've been covering here on Inside Sources throughout the year. Really interesting, though, a recent article from The Atlantic, and one of the extraordinary writers and thinkers, Anne Applebaum, really gave us an optimistic perspective regarding the future of Europe, even in the face of renewed Russian aggression. So I had a chance to speak with Anne Applebaum, and I asked her to lay out the case for optimism in the future based on a speech she had given to Germans, but I think could have been delivered to Americans today. Here's what she said.
So to be clear, article was based on a speech I gave in Germany, and it was directed at Germans, but I think it's useful for Americans too. It was a reminder that for me, watching what Russia has done over the last decade, starting with the invasion of Crimea, continuing with the invasion of the rest of Ukraine, has a kind of deja vu flavor. So I wrote several books about the Soviet Union. I know Soviet tactics. When I saw the invasion of Crimea, I almost took my breath away. It was so similar to the Soviet invasion of Poland in 1944 and 45, all kinds of ways, soldiers in fake uniforms, fake referendum, and so on. And I wanted to remind the audience and to remind readers that we've seen these kinds of tactics before, that an aggressive state seeking to occupy another, seeking to change the nature of that state. So what the Russians are doing in Ukraine when they occupy territory, they begin immediately setting up concentration camps. They call filtration camps. They collect Ukrainians. They interrogate them. Some of them go to jail. They've kidnapped children. Some 20,000 children have been taken out of Ukraine and sent to Russia. They're seeking to change the state, to remove Ukrainianness, to Russify it, which is exactly the kind of thing that the Soviet Union once did in the territories that it occupied. And so my speech was a reminder that these things have happened before, but also a reminder that we've fought them before. So we gathered our forces to fight Hitler. We created an alliance to fight, to push back against the Soviet Union. We did it before. We can do it again.
Yeah, I thought one of the stirring things in your piece, again, referencing this speech you delivered, talking about the fact that this is not a call to Germany to become pacifists, but you actually have to lean into this and have a different kind of conversation. I love the whole Mussolini quote in terms of everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. And those are the very things that we all have to stand up against when it comes to authoritarian rule.
Well, so it's particularly important, in Germany, think yourself into their shoes. I mean, they've had this culture for the last several decades of, we're never again, we can't repeat the war. The war was a tragedy. And that's created a kind of a culture of both well-meaning and also less well-meaning pacifism. There's a kind of pro-Russian version of it. There's a more idealistic version of it. And I was arguing that kind of pacifism in the face of a power that is seeking to eliminate any kind of life, any kind of originality, any element of Ukrainianness, and any opposition of any kind to the state, to this kind of totalizing, Mussolini-like state. That in the face of that, which is not that far away from their borders, that they have an obligation to fight back, and that the real, you won't have peace in Europe until that kind of threat is gone. And so it was an argument against this kind of simplistic pacifism. I mean, it was interesting because the prize I was given is called the German Peace Prize, and that was the lecture I was giving. And so but it was an argument I felt was really important to make, and people seemed to be willing to listen to that. I mean, of course, from our point of view, from the American point of view, we've also been a nation that has believed that kind of power, that kind of totalitarian or authoritarian power, should not spread. It should not be inflicted on democracies, especially not on ones that are close allies. And so I'm glad someone like you read that and felt moved by it as well.
Yeah, well, and I think there are so many lessons that are just right here close to home. We can look across and say, well, the Germans need to do this and Ukraine needs to do that. And, Europe's got to get their act together and all of this. But there are many lessons. As I read your piece and reread it, this is one that is a think again about thinking again kind of piece. That we do have things right here close to home, that we are blessed in so many ways, that our voices aren't restrained or restricted, as you pointed out, that we don't get jailed or shipped off to a reindoctrination camp. But those are all things that can quickly go, and I love the way you framed that, again, both in the historic context, but help us understand and connect those dots for us from the historic context in terms of what should we here in a very comfortable space within the United States be thinking about or maybe thinking again about?
So democracy historically is very fragile. And remember, our founders knew that. The people who wrote the American Constitution were super aware that there could someday, Alexander Hamilton talked about a demagogue arriving. Ben Franklin famously said when he was asked what kind of a country it was going to be, he said a republic, if you can keep it. They knew that there are these, there are always forces who want to undermine democracy. There's an attraction to demagoguery. And it's very important to remember that to maintain this, the institutions requires a huge amount of civic participation. People have to understand what's at stake in their elections. They have to vote. They have to think about the outcomes, and they have to think about maintaining a system where we have rights, where we have the rule of law, and especially where the institutions of the government are not used by one party or one leader to persecute their enemies. Normally nowadays in most parts of the world, when democracies decline, it's not because of some kind of military coup. It's because a democratically elected leader wins an election and then begins to dismantle, whether it's the judiciary or using the state to attack the media, or using the state to harass enemies by investigating them, or all those things are things we need to be aware of too. We're not an island. We're not immune to these kinds of trends or emotions, and it's important that Americans, when everybody votes this week, if you haven't voted yet, that everybody remembers that.
Yeah, so important. And I want to just close out. I want to sneak in one last thing. And that is, you concluded your piece with some facts that, hey, this is not just a military thing, but it's this creeping appeal of autocratic rule and how people have used the dis-ease we might have of today to either go back to kind of a cheap nostalgia for what was, or some kind of misty future of what control and stability looks or feels like. Just walk us through that in the context of where we are and what each of us individually need to do.
Yeah, so this was a topic of my previous book called Twilight of Democracy. Look, we live in a really fast-changing world. I think we don't realize how much it's changed. Political change, economic change, but also change in the nature of information, how we know about the world. Now we know about it through our phones and not just through reality. Demographic change, social change. Historically, whenever there's a time of really rapid change like that, people become nostalgic for a simpler time, or they want to have one leader, or they want to end the cacophony and this kind of, chainsaw noise of debate, and they want a single answer or a single explanation. And those temptations are real. And, it is true that if you grew up in rural America or rural Germany or rural Poland 50 years ago, the world that you live in now is very different. And maybe the world that you grew up in doesn't really exist anymore. And so, but that doesn't mean that going backwards or will fix the problem. And so it's very, very important to be engaged in your society, in your neighborhood. Remain optimistic. Think about how to make the country better. Think about how to make it more inclusive. We're a big, complicated country, and actually, we always have been. We have to have rules that allow us to live with each other. We have to be able to listen to each other, and keeping that in mind, especially over what I think might be a difficult week, useful to remember.
So important to remember all of that as we roll through this weekend and march our way towards next Tuesday, the first Tuesday of November, as we cast ballots and as races are decided. There's a lot of things to think about and to think again about. And as always, we appreciate Anne Applebaum and her perspective, her great writing, and great thinking. You can check out her piece again at The Atlantic. All her books are worth reading, by the way. She is one of the great thinkers and writers in the country today, and we always appreciate her carving out time for us. All right, we'll go ahead and step aside for one last break. When we come back, some final thoughts on a Friday here on Inside Sources on KSL News Radio. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer? Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. And now, during our Veterans Day sale, save 40% on the Sleep Number Special Edition smart bed. Limited time. To find a store near you, visit sleepnumber.com.
Febreze. So my home is also my office. And before I can focus, every room's gotta be clean. That means tidying up and spraying my Febreze Air Mist. Ooh, that's fresh. Febreze Air Mist scents are all high quality. They fight any weird funk, and they give my air an instant boost of freshness. So not only does my home smell good, I feel good too. After I Febreze, it's time to start my day.
Breathe happy, Febreze, la 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 la.
Did you know 96% of Americans lose an average of $111,000 in Social Security income? And it's because they claim their benefits at the wrong time. Don't lose $111,000 in Social Security income that's rightfully yours. Learn how you could wring every nickel out of your benefits on Retirement Solutions Radio this Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock, right here on KSL. News Radio 102.7.
Winter's on the way. Soon the snow will be falling where? On your roof. If you need a new one, now's the time to call IWC Roofing. See, the shingle companies raise prices January 1st, but IWC will lock in this year's prices, even if you want your new roof next spring. And if you book now, they'll also give you an extra $2,000 off. $2,000 off IWC's already low prices. As the #1 residential roofing contractor in Utah, they get volume discounts on shingles and pass the savings on to you. Plus $2,000 off, and you lock in this year's prices. IWC is one of the very few Owens Corning Platinum certified roofers in the state. Their precision teams are so skilled they'll re-roof your home in a single day. They'll send you pictures from the roof so you know exactly what you're getting, and then they'll power wash your driveway just to say thanks. Call now, 801-232-5690. That's 801-232-5690, or go to IWCRoofingUtah.com.
So this new dose is, nope, that's not it. The price is nowhere to be found.
Mr. Green? Hi, it's all good. We've got this.
This is not just help from a Walgreens pharmacist.
Oh, new prescriptions. Cool. Let me check to see if these are the lowest cost options covered by your Medicare plan.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
This is someone supporting you every step of the way. Chat with a pharmacist today to find help saving. This is the human kind of help. Walgreens.
An official message from Medicare.
Medicare plans change from one year to the next. And this year, it's important for you to review your current coverage and compare all your options during Medicare open enrollment. Compare health plans, drug coverage, and costs. See if you can save some money, and don't forget to make sure your drugs are covered. Open enrollment ends December 7th. Visit Medicare.gov or call 1-800-MEDICARE.
Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
The Management Minute is a service of the MBA program in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. I'm Professor Scott Hammond. I followed as one of my former students, an experienced manager, went through the hiring process. He went through a screening and then 4 levels of interviews before he was finally hired. After 4 or 5 months of failed applications, by the way, I asked him why he finally succeeded, and he gave me this gem of wisdom. I realized that most of the applicants that they were interviewing had the technical skills to do the job right. To stand out, I needed to show my collaboration skills. He was right. The president of a country, a college, or a corporation will face complex problems. Complex problems can only be solved through collaboration. To learn collaboration with others, learn it in an MBA program at Utah State University. Go to utahstatemba.com. That's utahstatemba.com. I'm Scott Hammond. Hope to see you in one of our classes.
When Dee and I build our new home, and it's almost been 10 years now, I think of all of the appliances that we put in that house, and I cannot tell you how many of them already we have had some major repairs and even replacements. You know the one thing that I haven't given a second thought to? It's the Connecticut soft water system. It is remarkable. We've had 2 systems in 2 different homes, and not once have we ever called with an issue to my friends at Connecticut. It's time for you to call Connecticut. If you're replacing an old system or if you're building a new home, whatever it might be, you will be amazed at how efficient the Connecticut soft water system is. For example, when your neighbor puts in 3 bags of salt in his or her system, you will be putting in only 1. It's remarkable how efficient it is. Give them a call. Great people to do business with. Call Northern Utah's authorized Connecticut dealer at 801-576-8600 or go to softwaterutah.com.
Be advised, this is your opportunity to save up to 40 to 80% on a hot tub or swim spa. This weekend only, today through Sunday. Utah State Fair Park. Be advised, this is your opportunity to save up to 40 to 80% on a hot tub or swim spa. This weekend only, today through Sunday. Utah State Fair Park. 18-month interest-free financing. Our factories have demanded we sell 1,000 hot tubs and swim spas this weekend. Utah State Fair Park. Huge factory incentives, factory rebates, this weekend only. Utah State Fair Park. We can remove your old hot tub. Free delivery of your new hot tub. Hot tub starting at $2,999. Utah State Fair Park. Free delivery of your new hot tub. Just relax and enjoy. Utah State Fair Park. Today, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Saturday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Free admission, free parking, free delivery. Utah State Fair Park. Call 833-SPA-SALE or visit hottubandswimspasale.com.
With the 3 things you need to know this hour, I'm Dan Bomas. First, U of U police are looking for a man who fired shots into the air near the campus overnight. Second, if you can bring home Davis County's missing drug dog, they've doubled the reward to $2,000. And third, there's one health department in Idaho that's decided not to provide COVID shots anymore. 55 degrees, partly cloudy in Salt Lake City. And back to Inside Sources on KSL News Radio.
Rage from Reason on Inside Sources.
Welcome back to Inside Sources here on KSL News Radio. It's great to be with you today, as always. I am Boyd Matheson. As we round out the show and as we round out the week, I want to give you a couple things to noodle on as you head into the weekend. And I want to start with something that I have tried to live by behind this microphone. And that's a really simple old axiom that those who risk teaching must never stop learning. Those who risk teaching must never stop learning. And we've talked about how important teaching is and how we've seen so little of it in the course of trying to elect a leader, not just at the top of the ticket in the presidential race, but in all the other races that go down ballot. But the real key, if you're going to be a leader, is you have to teach. And if you're going to be a teacher, you have to keep learning, which means you have to avoid the pitfalls that we often talk about. Instant certainty is the enemy of truth. It undermines trust. We've talked about fostering and developing a real healthy dose of intellectual humility to recognize you may not have all the answers. And what does that do? It causes you to have to learn, which leads to radical curiosity, and that you have to make that a perpetual cycle in your life and in your world. That's what great leaders always do. And it's true that the days of the old-style command and control leadership, those days have come and gone. Leadership today requires those who would stand to lead to teach, to really transform individuals and organizations, to move from being a manager to a mentor, from a commander to a coach. The greatest leaders are those who constantly teach. They teach those who lead to do more, to become better, and achieve real results in the process. So if you're determined to lead, or if you're deciding who to vote for to lead, you have to be determined to teach. And if you're determined to teach, you have to be determined to never stop learning. Past experience is great, but it's only going to take you so far, especially in a rapidly changing world like what we live in. We have more changes in one of our 24-hour days than our parents or grandparents had in decades of their lives. That's how fast the change is going. So continuous learning has never been more important, and for leaders, it's becoming the linchpin for influence, for impact, and ultimately for success. So a leader takes the risk every time they ask their followers to do something new, to change a direction, to improve performance, to do it different than they have in the past. And being able to lead through that personal example of continuous learning, again, intellectual humility, avoiding instant certainty, and having radical curiosity, that's powerful. That's what leadership really looks like. Someone that I have looked to, someone I had the opportunity to work with, legendary executive John Thompson. He was at IBM for many years. He came to Symantec just after I had arrived at Symantec long years ago and went on, of course, to be the head of Microsoft. And he was someone who was a forever learner. I remember when he first came in with big, audacious goals. He came to this little Silicon Valley startup company in Symantec that had a little bit of internet security and a whole host of other products that had no connection to one another. And he said, we're going to be the leader in internet security. And he said, we're going to be $1 billion company. I'm not sure which of those were more crazy or more audacious. But the way he went about it was through learning. And often in his leadership style, he would share a thought from a book he had read or something that he had studied. He never shared everything. This was genius on his part. I watched him do this a million times. I watched him do this in elevators sometimes. He would just make a quick reference to something, a quick quote from an author, an idea that had maybe challenged his thinking, or something that had caused him to pursue an opportunity a little differently than maybe he had in the past. And again, he would do this in meetings, yes. He would do this in emails and official messages for sure. But John Thompson was the master of getting rid of the instant certainty, making sure everyone was intellectually humble, having that humility, and staying radically curious. That curiosity, so important. And the culture inside the organization soon followed. And it was so fun to watch it play out because the culture quickly developed that if John mentioned a book or an article, you better go find it. You better go get it. You better go read it. Or you were going to be left behind in the next meeting where John would start to apply the principles. He'd start to apply the concepts without any reference to the book. So only those who were astute enough and who were quick to observe and quick to act were on the same page that he was. It was actually a way he weeded out the pretenders, the managers, from the real leaders. And those were the ones that he wanted to build an organization around. It was brilliant. It was teaching. It was extraordinary leadership. So if you're going to lead, you have to teach. And if you're going to take the risk to teach, then you got to keep learning. You got to put your own learning in high gear. So how is your learning lately? On everything, not just political things, not just in your professional life, but in all the different aspects of life. What was the last thing you read, watched, or studied? What have you shared from your learning with those that you lead or those that you interact with every day? It's an extraordinary thing to watch a leader do this. John Thompson did it better than anybody I've ever seen. He would just throw out that quote, mention a book, mention an article, and then 2 meetings down the road, he's just mentioning the principle and going right to it. And so those that were quick to observe, those who had that intellectual humility, were able to avoid instant certainty that often comes with titles and remain radically curious. That curiosity were those who ultimately led the company, and they did become $1 billion organization. Well, that wraps it up for us on Inside Sources today here on KSL News Radio. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference.
KSL FM Midvale.